Jeremiah Brooks had always believed that hard work could open any door. Born in a small farming town in rural Georgia, he grew up watching his father till the soil by hand, coaxing life from the earth with nothing more than simple tools and endless determination. His father never owned much, but he had pride. Pride in the work, pride in feeding families, and pride in keeping promises. Jeremiah had carried that pride with him all his life. Over the years, he had taken the little piece of farmland he inherited and turned it into one of the most productive organic farms in the state. It wasn't luck. It was years of early mornings and late nights, planting when others slept, harvesting when others rested, and driving old trucks loaded with fresh produce to far-off markets when others were home with their families. Jeremiah didn't complain. He loved the work. Slowly, his small farm expanded, acre by acre. He learned about better irrigation, invested in greenhouses, and started supplying big grocery chains. Contracts grew. So did his savings. While many people in his town still saw him as just a farmer, Jeremiah quietly became a millionaire, several times over. Even with all his success, Jeremiah never changed much about how he lived. He still wore the same kind of clothes he had worn as a boy: faded jeans, sturdy work boots, and a flannel shirt that felt like home. He drove an old pickup that rattled if you pushed it too hard. People might have assumed he lived a modest life because he didn't have much, but the truth was, Jeremiah simply didn't care for showing off. His money was for investing in his farm, taking care of his workers, and helping his community, not for impressing strangers. But Jeremiah had been thinking about something for a while, something that would make his business easier and open, new possibilities. He was tired of the long drives and connecting flights that took up days when he could have been managing his farm. Traveling to meet clients in different states was exhausting. He started to dream of owning a small private jet. It wasn't about luxury. For him, it was about efficiency. Being able to fly to a meeting in a few hours instead of wasting 2 days on the road or in airports. He did his research carefully. He wasn't the type to make rash decisions, especially with money. He read about different jet models, looked into their costs, maintenance, and safety records. He even spoke to a few other business owners who had their own planes. After months of studying, he decided he was ready to make the purchase. The morning he set out for the private airport, the sun was shining over his fields, turning the crops into a sea of gold and green. Jeremiah walked through the rows one last time before leaving, checking the soil, nodding to his workers, and making a few quick notes in his worn leather notebook. He then washed his hands in the cool water pump by the barn, climbed into his old truck, and began the hour-long drive to the city. The highway stretched out ahead of him, dotted with billboards and the occasional passing car. He thought about how far he'd come. There had been a time when even buying fuel for the tractor was a struggle, and now he was on his way to buy a jet. It was almost unbelievable, but he felt no need to brag. In his mind, this was simply the next step in growing his business. When he reached the airport, it was nothing like the busy passenger terminals most people knew. This was a private aviation hub, quiet, with sleek glass buildings, manicured lawns, and expensive cars parked in neat rows. A white fence separated the showroom from the runway, where a few small jets gleamed in the sunlight. Jeremiah parked his old truck in the visitor's lot, locking it with a click of the worn metal key, and made his way to the main building. The glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, and a rush of cool air greeted him. The showroom floor was spotless, reflecting the bright lights from above. Inside, the atmosphere felt more like a luxury car dealership than an airport. The walls were lined with framed photographs of jets flying over oceans, mountains, and famous city skylines. The smell of polished wood and fresh coffee floated through the air. Jeremiah stepped inside slowly, taking in the sight of 3 gleaming jets parked just beyond the massive glass windows. They looked fast, elegant, and powerful. Exactly what he had imagined. He was excited, but he kept his expression calm. This was a business decision, and he wanted to handle it with the same patience and care he applied to his farming. At the reception desk, a young woman smiled politely and asked if he had an appointment. Jeremiah explained that he was interested in buying a jet and would like to speak to a salesperson. She nodded and made a quick phone call, then told him someone would be with him shortly. He thanked her and stood near the window, gazing at the planes. From the corner of his eye, Jeremiah noticed a man approaching. He was tall, well-groomed, wearing a tailored suit and shiny black shoes that looked like they had never touched dirt. The man's name tag read, Craig Wilton, Senior Sales Executive. Craig's eyes flicked over Jeremiah quickly, scanning his boots, jeans, and flannel shirt. His polite smile tightened into something that wasn't quite a smile anymore. Before saying hello, Craig glanced at Jeremiah's hands, noticing the rough skin and calluses from years of work. In that moment, Craig made an assumption, the kind of assumption Jeremiah had faced before but had hoped he wouldn't encounter today. The salesman's tone was light, but there was an edge to it when he finally spoke. "Sir," Craig began, his voice slow and careful, "this is a private jet showroom. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Jeremiah looked him in the eye and nodded. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm here to buy a jet." Craig's eyebrows lifted slightly, as though he were trying to hide a laugh. "Jets here start at around $2 million, he said. "I just want to make sure you're aware of that before we waste any time." Jeremiah kept his voice steady. "I'm aware," he replied. The salesman's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We have another facility down the road that deals with crop dusters and smaller planes for, agricultural use. That might be more in line with what you're looking for." For a moment, Jeremiah said nothing. He had learned long ago that sometimes silence spoke louder than words. He simply stood there, his eyes calm, his posture relaxed. Inside, though, he felt the sting of being judged without anyone knowing his story. He had walked into that showroom, ready to make a purchase that could change the way he did business, yet here he was, being treated like he didn't belong. He didn't argue. Instead, he turned his gaze back to the planes outside the window, letting the quiet stretch between them. Craig shifted uncomfortably, perhaps realizing that Jeremiah wasn't going to be embarrassed or hurried away. The air between them felt heavy, filled with unspoken questions. In that moment, Jeremiah decided that how he handled the next few minutes would matter more than the money in his bank account. He hadn't come all this way just to let someone else's opinion define him. He had worked too hard, come too far, and built too much to walk away quietly. He smiled faintly, not out of amusement, but out of the quiet confidence of someone who knew his own worth. The real conversation was yet to come. Craig stood there, his polished shoes planted firmly on the spotless showroom floor, waiting for Jeremiah to respond. The salesman's half-smile hadn't moved, but his eyes carried a faint impatience. Jeremiah could tell that Craig had already made up his mind about him. It wasn't the first time someone had judged him by his clothes, his rough hands, or the faint scent of the outdoors that seemed to follow him no matter how much soap he used. But what struck Jeremiah wasn't just the assumption, it was how. Quickly, Craig had tried to push him out, like someone moving aside a package that didn't belong in the room. Jeremiah took a slow breath, looking at the planes again. Outside the glass, the sunlight made their polished bodies glimmer like silver fish in water. He had dreamed about this moment for months. Finally standing in a showroom where he could choose a plane for himself. But the excitement was clouded, now by the sour taste of someone's quick judgment. "Sir," Craig said again, breaking the silence, "if you tell me your budget, I can guide you to something that fits your needs." He let the pause stretch a little too long before saying, "needs," as though the word carried a different meaning for someone like Jeremiah. Jeremiah turned and faced him fully. His voice was calm but steady. "I didn't come here to talk about crop dusters. I came to talk about jets, the ones out there," he said, pointing to the aircraft on the runway. If you can help me, fine. If not, I'll speak to someone. Who can? Craig chuckled softly, the kind of laugh people use when they think they know more than you. Jets like that, he said, gesturing toward the largest one visible through the glass. Start at over $10 million. That's before maintenance, hangar fees, and crew costs. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Jeremiah could feel the receptionist glancing at them from her desk. Her smile had faded into the kind of expression people get when they sense trouble but aren't sure if they should step in. Two other staff members, seated at a far desk, whispered something to each other. One of them looked up at Jeremiah with a small grin, then quickly looked away. Craig, however, kept his focus on Jeremiah. Maybe you'd like to take a look at our smaller inventory, he suggested. His tone dipped in politeness but coated with doubt. We have some older models, still great planes, more affordable. Jeremiah's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. I didn't drive an hour to look at something I don't want. I came here for the best you have. If that's too much for you to show me, just say so. Craig's smile faded for the first time. His eyes narrowed slightly, as though Jeremiah's persistence was an unexpected inconvenience. It's not about what I can show you, Craig replied. It's about being realistic. Jeremiah stepped closer, closing the space between them, just enough so his words would be heard clearly. Realistic, he said quietly. Let me tell you something about realistic. I've worked my land since I was old enough to carry a bucket. I've been up before the sun every day for more years than I can count. I've built something from nothing. And when I say I'm here to buy a jet, that's exactly what I mean. So if you think you can decide what's realistic for me, you're mistaken. For a moment, Craig seemed caught off guard. He hadn't expected such a steady, confident reply. He glanced toward the office at the far end of the showroom, perhaps thinking about calling in someone else. Jeremiah, seeing the hesitation, decided it was time to take control of the situation completely. Get your manager, he said. I'd like to speak to them. Craig shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Sir, there's no need to escalate. Manager, Jeremiah repeated, his voice still calm but with a finality that made it clear it wasn't a request. The receptionist, perhaps sensing that Jeremiah wasn't someone to be brushed aside, picked up the phone before Craig could respond. She spoke quietly into the receiver, her eyes flicking between the two men. A moment later, the door to the office opened, and an older man in a dark blue suit stepped out. He had silver hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of confident walk that came from decades in business. His name tag read, Lawrence, General Manager. Lawrence approached with an easy smile, extending his hand to Jeremiah. Welcome to Falcon Private Aviation, he said warmly. I'm Lawrence. I hear you're interested in purchasing a jet? Yes, Jeremiah said, shaking his hand firmly. That's why I'm here. Lawrence turned to Craig, raising an eyebrow. Have you shown him the models? Craig hesitated. We hadn't gotten that far yet. Jeremiah decided this was the moment to make himself completely clear. He reached into his flannel shirt pocket and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. Without saying a word, he handed it to Lawrence. The manager unfolded it, and his eyes scanned the numbers. It was a bank statement, recent, official, and showing a balance that made even Lawrence pause for a fraction of a second. Jeremiah then took out a second paper, a list of active contracts with major grocery chains across the country. The names on that list were recognizable, and the figures were substantial. I'm not here to waste time, Jeremiah said evenly. I've done my research. I know what I want. I just need someone who will take me seriously. Lawrence looked up, his smile returning, this time tinged with genuine respect. Mr. Brooks, he said, I apologize for any misunderstanding. Let's get you seated, and I'll personally walk you through our best inventory. Craig's face was unreadable, but the faint redness creeping up his neck was hard to miss. He opened his mouth as if to say something. then closed it again. Lawrence gave him a brief glance, one that carried more meaning than words, and Craig stepped back, silent now. The receptionist appeared with coffee, setting it on a small glass table beside a set of leather chairs. Jeremiah sat down, not in a rush, and looked out at the jets again. The conversation had shifted, but the memory of Craig's earlier tone still lingered. Jeremiah thought about all the years he had faced moments like this, people deciding who he was before he even spoke. Today, though, he wasn't going to let it slide. Not because of pride in his wealth, but because of the principle that every customer, every person, deserved respect from the start. Lawrence began explaining the features of their top models, describing speed, range, fuel efficiency, and comfort. Jeremiah listened carefully, asking sharp questions that showed he had done his homework. Every so often, Lawrence would glance toward Craig as if silently reminding him of the cost of assumptions. Outside, the sunlight shifted, casting long shadows of the jets across the runway. Jeremiah felt a quiet sense of control returning. He wasn't sure yet if he would buy here, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer the one being underestimated. Jeremiah sat back in the leather chair, his fingers resting lightly on the armrest as Lawrence continued talking about the different jet models. The hum of the air conditioning and the faint sound of a distant plane engine filled the background. It felt almost surreal to be in this space, listening to details about aircraft that could cross the country without stopping, yet knowing just minutes ago he had been treated like he didn't belong here. Lawrence explained the specs with ease. The cruising speeds, the luxurious seating arrangements, the fuel capacity. Jeremiah nodded now and then, asking questions about maintenance schedules, warranty coverage, and what kind of hangar space would be needed. His tone was calm, but there was a sharp focus in his eyes. It was the same look he had when examining a new irrigation system or negotiating a big supply contract. Craig, meanwhile, stood off to the side, quiet now. Every once in a while, Jeremiah caught him glancing over, but their eyes didn't meet for long. The confidence Craig had displayed earlier was gone, replaced by a stiffness in his posture. The earlier laughter in his voice had disappeared entirely. After about 15 minutes, Lawrence suggested they take a walk outside to look at the jets up close. Jeremiah agreed, rising from his seat and following him toward the glass doors. Craig trailed behind, silent, as though unsure whether to be part of this tour or stay behind. The bright sunlight washed over them as they stepped outside. The jets stood gleaming in neat rows, their bodies reflecting the sky. Jeremiah moved, slowly taking in every detail, the shape of the wings, the position of the engines, the way the sunlight hit the paint. To someone else, they might have just been symbols of luxury, but to Jeremiah, each one represented possibilities. Reaching markets faster, meeting clients face-to-face without the hassle of commercial travel, even being able to visit other states, and return the same day to oversee his fields. Lawrence led him to one of the mid-sized jets, its sleek design balanced between power and efficiency. This one, Lawrence explained, has a range of over 3,000 miles, perfect for coast-to-coast trips. It can seat up to 8 passengers and the cabin can be customized to your needs. Jeremiah stepped closer, running his hand along the smooth side of the plane. "And what about fuel efficiency?" he asked. "Better than most in its class," Lawrence replied. "Maintenance is straightforward, and parts are readily available. We've sold a few of these to business owners who travel frequently for work. They've been very happy with them." Craig finally spoke, his voice cautious. "It's a very good model," he said, almost as if he were testing the waters to see if Jeremiah would respond to him. Jeremiah didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked inside the cabin, taking note of the plush leather seats, the polished wood surfaces, and the quiet hum of the air conditioning inside. He imagined sitting here with his business manager, reviewing contracts on the way to a meeting, or returning home in time to check the fields before sunset. They moved on to a larger jet, one with more range and additional seating. Lawrence explained that it was often used by companies with multiple executives traveling together. The price tag was higher, but Jeremiah didn't flinch. He listened, asked questions about its performance in different weather conditions, and noted the features that could be useful for his business. After touring several planes, they returned to the shaded area near the hangar. Lawrence offered Jeremiah a cold bottle of water and gestured toward a small table where they could sit. "Mr. Brooks," Lawrence began, "if you don't mind me saying so, you clearly know what you're looking for. You've done your research." Jeremiah smiled faintly. "I don't like wasting time," he said. "Whether it's planting season or buying equipment, I believe in understanding what I'm getting into before I make a decision." Lawrence nodded in approval. "That's how it should be. I wish more buyers came in prepared like you." Jeremiah could feel Craig's presence nearby, standing just out of the conversation but close enough to hear every word. And that's when Jeremiah decided it was time to address what had happened earlier, not in anger, but in truth. "Lawrence," Jeremiah said evenly, "when I walked in here, I was met with a lot of doubt before I even had the chance to say much. I've learned to deal with it over the years, but I think it's worth saying out loud. People often make quick judgments based on clothes, on calloused hands, on the kind of truck someone drives. What they can't see at a glance is the years of work behind it. They don't see the early mornings, the late nights, the seasons where you pray for rain or the ones where you pray for it to stop." Lawrence listened carefully, his expression serious. Craig shifted uncomfortably. "I walked in here ready to buy," Jeremiah continued. "But before I could even sit down, I was told I might be in the wrong place. I don't think anyone should be treated that way, whether they have money or not. Respect should come first." There was a pause. The sound of a plane taxiing in the distance filled the space between them. Lawrence nodded slowly. "You're right," he said, "and I'm sorry for the way you were treated when you arrived. That's not how we want our customers to feel." Jeremiah didn't say anything more about it. The point had been made. He pulled out a small notebook from his pocket, the same one he used to jot down planting schedules and maintenance logs, and began writing down the names of the jet models he had liked most. He asked Lawrence for printed brochures and a list of current prices. Lawrence personally gathered the information, placing it neatly in a folder. He also included his business card. "If you decide to move forward," he said, "I'll make sure you're taken care of personally." Jeremiah accepted the folder and shook his hand. "Thank you," he said. Craig finally spoke again, his tone softer than before. "Mr. Brooks, I just want to say—" Jeremiah turned toward him, his face neutral. "You don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "Just remember this moment the next time someone walks through that door. You never know who you're talking to." Craig's mouth closed again, and he gave a short nod. With that, Jeremiah left the hangar and walked back toward the visitor parking lot. The hot afternoon sun beat down on the pavement, but there was a light breeze. His old pickup truck sat in the same spot, looking almost out of place among the polished luxury cars. He opened the door, placed the folder on the passenger seat, and started the engine. As he drove away, Jeremiah felt no bitterness, only a sense of quiet satisfaction. The truth had been spoken, and the decision was now in his hands. He would buy a jet, but it didn't have to be from here. And when he did, he would make sure to remember how it felt to be underestimated, so he'd never do it to anyone else. Jeremiah returned to his farm that evening, the setting sun casting long orange shadows across the fields he had nurtured for years. The soil smelled rich and earthy after a recent rain, and the crops stood tall, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. As he stepped out of his old pickup truck, he carried with him the folder from Falcon Private Aviation, a small reminder of the day's events. The folder felt heavy, not with weight, but with the potential of what it represented, the chance to expand his business, to travel faster, and to show the world that he had earned everything he had. Inside, his family was finishing dinner. His children asked about his day, expecting the usual stories about planting schedules, equipment repairs, and meetings with suppliers. Jeremiah smiled, setting the folder on the kitchen table. "I visited a jet showroom today," he said casually, trying not to show the excitement bubbling inside him. His eldest daughter's eyes widened. "A jet? Like a real plane that flies across states?" "Yes," Jeremiah replied. "And I learned a lot today. Not just about jets, but about people, too." His youngest son tilted his head. "People? What do you mean?" Jeremiah sat down, taking a deep breath. "Some people judge others before they even speak with them. They see the way someone dresses, the dirt under their nails, or the kind of car they drive, and they assume they don't belong. But that's not reality. Hard work, honesty, and determination can't be seen on the surface. That's what I learned today." His family listened quietly, sensing that Jeremiah's story carried more than just the details of a jet showroom. It carried a lesson, one he had learned over years of facing challenges, and one he now wanted to pass on. That night, after dinner, Jeremiah sat in his office with the folder open in front of him. He reviewed every jet model carefully, comparing prices, fuel efficiency, seating, and maintenance requirements. His pen moved across the page, making notes, circling numbers, and highlighting options that suited both his business and personal travel needs. He felt a surge of excitement. This was the kind of planning he loved. Every decision had meaning, and every choice reflected his hard work and vision. Over the next few days, Jeremiah visited a few more aviation companies. Each visit confirmed what he had already suspected. Many salespeople assumed that someone like him wouldn't have the resources to make a serious purchase. But each time he presented his documents, his contracts, and his proof of financial stability, the attitude changed instantly. Respect replaced doubt, and questions replaced assumptions. One morning, after a long drive to another showroom, Jeremiah sat down with the manager, a woman named Carla, who greeted him warmly. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "I've reviewed your information. You're looking at our most advanced models, correct?" "Yes," Jeremiah replied, "and I want to see everything that could fit my needs." Carla smiled, showing him a private hangar where the latest jets were lined up like trophies. Jeremiah's eyes lit up. This was the experience he had imagined, where he was treated not as an outsider, but as a serious buyer. Each jet he inspected reflected possibilities he hadn't even considered before: faster deliveries, business expansion, and more time to spend at home with his family. During one inspection, a salesperson made a subtle comment about his attire. But Jeremiah, having learned from his previous encounters, calmly explained that he preferred practical clothing for his work on the farm, and that he expected to be treated with respect regardless. The salesperson immediately apologized, realizing that Jeremiah's confidence and preparation left no room for assumptions. Back at the farm, Jeremiah shared his findings with his family. Together, they discussed which jet would best serve both his business and family needs. His wife listened closely, offering thoughtful advice on seating arrangements and luggage capacity. His children chimed in with ideas, imagining weekend trips and family visits that had once seemed impossible. It was a rare moment of planning for the future, and Jeremiah cherished it. One evening, while reviewing the final options, Jeremiah received a phone call from Lawrence, the manager at Falcon Private Aviation. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "I wanted to follow up. I hope you're finding what you're looking for." Jeremiah smiled, recalling the tension of their first meeting. "I am, Lawrence, but I've visited a few other companies since then. It's interesting how quickly respect and understanding can change when people actually see what you've accomplished." Lawrence chuckled. "I can imagine. And I hope that if you choose us, you'll feel fully supported. But I understand if you want to explore your options." "I will," Jeremiah replied, "and thank you for treating me fairly. It made a difference." A few days later, Jeremiah made his decision. He returned to Falcon Private Aviation, folder in hand, ready to finalize his choice. Lawrence greeted him warmly, and Craig, the salesman, who had doubted him before, was noticeably absent. Jeremiah didn't dwell on it. He was focused on the moment, on the steps ahead. Together with Lawrence, Jeremiah signed the necessary documents. Each signature represented years of dedication, hard work, and persistence. He felt a sense of pride, not in the act of buying a jet, but in knowing that he had proven something important, that respect should be earned by actions, not appearances, and that determination can overcome assumptions. After the signing, Lawrence offered a tour of the cabin and cockpit, explaining the controls, safety features, and navigation systems. Jeremiah listened attentively, asking questions, imagining himself in the pilot's seat, traveling across the country with efficiency and purpose. He pictured the first trip he would make, delivering fresh produce to distant markets in record time, attending meetings in multiple states in a single day, and returning home to the farm before sunset. As he walked back toward the hangar doors, Jeremiah's thoughts drifted to Craig. He hoped the lesson had stayed with him, that assumptions based on appearance are often wrong, and that opportunity should never be limited by prejudice. Jeremiah didn't hold grudges, but he understood the importance of standing firm, of insisting on respect, and of letting actions speak louder than words. Back at the farm that evening, Jeremiah shared the news with his family, his children's eyes widened with excitement, imagining the new possibilities this jet would bring. His wife hugged him tightly, proud of his persistence and careful planning. "You did it," she said softly. "You showed them exactly who you are." "Yes," Jeremiah replied, "but more importantly, I showed myself. I've always known my worth, but today, the world had a chance to see it too." The days that followed were filled with preparation. Pilots were contacted, flight schedules were planned, and hangar space was arranged. Jeremiah oversaw each step personally, ensuring that everything met his standards. He worked with a quiet confidence, knowing that he had earned this opportunity and that it would open doors for his family and business in ways he had only dreamed of before. Finally, the day came for the jet's first test flight. Jeremiah walked onto the tarmac, the sleek machine gleaming in the sunlight. The pilot greeted him, explaining the pre-flight procedures, safety checks, and flight path. Jeremiah listened carefully, absorbing every detail as the engines roared. To life, a feeling of triumph surged through him. He had faced doubt, judgment, and skepticism, and yet he had persisted. Now, as the jet lifted smoothly into the sky, he felt the full weight of his achievement, not just in the machine beneath him, but in the journey he had undertaken to reach this point. As the plane soared above the fields he had nurtured for decades, Jeremiah looked down at the land he loved. The farm appeared small from this height, but to him it symbolized everything he had worked for: patience, resilience, and unwavering dedication. Every acre, every crop, every early morning and long night had led to this moment. Jeremiah smiled, knowing that this jet was more than a tool. It was proof that perseverance, hard work, and integrity could overcome assumptions and open doors to possibilities previously unimaginable. The first official flight of Jeremiah's jet was set for a crisp morning. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. The farm was quiet, except for the occasional crow and the hum of the engines as ground staff prepared the plane. Jeremiah stood near the tarmac, dressed in his usual practical clothes, but today his posture and expression carried a sense of accomplishment and pride that could not be hidden. His family had joined him. His wife held their youngest child close, while the older children bounced with excitement, their eyes reflecting the sunlight and the gleaming fuselage of the jet. Jeremiah's eldest daughter, always the most inquisitive, leaned forward slightly. "Dad, are we really going to fly this?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. Yes, Jeremiah said, smiling. And this isn't just a flight for fun. It's the first of many trips that will help our farm, our business, and our family grow. But more importantly, it's a flight that shows what can happen when people believe in themselves and work hard. The pilot, a professional Jeremiah had carefully selected, approached and extended his hand. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks. Are you ready for your first ride?" Jeremiah shook the pilot's hand firmly. "Absolutely, let's make it a smooth one." As they walked toward the jet, Jeremiah thought back to the first time he had walked into Falcon Private Aviation. The memory of Craig's laughter and the salesman's doubt still lingered, but it no longer hurt him. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far he had come. Each challenge, each moment of doubt, had led him to this point, not just to own a jet, but to have the confidence and wisdom to navigate life with dignity and purpose. The family climbed aboard, and the interior of the jet immediately impressed them. The leather seats were comfortable, the wood trim polished and warm, and the cabin space ample for everyone. Jeremiah settled in, noticing the small details that reflected careful planning and thoughtful design. He could imagine hours passing, on long trips without discomfort, meetings taking place mid-air, and family trips across states being possible without the exhaustion of commercial travel. The engines roared to life, smooth and powerful, filling the cabin with vibration that was thrilling but controlled. Jeremiah's children pressed their faces to the windows, watching as the farm shrank beneath them, the familiar fields now looking small and distant. The city in the distance gleamed, its streets appearing as tiny lines from this height. As the jet lifted into the sky, Jeremiah felt a mixture of exhilaration and calm. The wind rushed past the windows, and the hum of the engines was steady and reassuring. He looked at his family, their faces lit with awe and joy, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Every early morning in the fields, every challenge he had faced had led to this moment of triumph. During the flight, Jeremiah spoke to his children about the importance of perseverance. "Remember," he said, pointing out the window at the horizon, "the world will sometimes judge you before it knows you. People might look at what you wear, where you come from, or how you speak, but your actions, your dedication, and your character are what truly matter. Never let anyone's assumptions define you." His eldest son, holding his notebook as if ready to write down every word, nodded earnestly. "I will, Dad," he said. "I want to remember this forever." Jeremiah smiled. "Good. And when you face challenges, think about this flight. You've worked hard, prepared, and stayed true to yourself. That's what carries you forward." Meanwhile, back on the ground, news of Jeremiah's purchase and flight began to spread. People in the local community admired his accomplishment, not just because he now owned a jet, but because of the way he had handled the entire experience. He had been treated with doubt, but he didn't respond with anger or bitterness. Instead, he showed patience, determination, and intelligence. His story quickly became an example of dignity and resilience for others who faced similar challenges. During the descent, Jeremiah reflected on the lessons learned from the previous interactions at the aviation showrooms. Craig's skepticism, the initial assumptions at Falcon, and even the doubts from other salespeople all had been met with composure and persistence. Jeremiah realized that the real journey was not just the acquisition of the jet, but the demonstration of respect, fairness, and the power of showing one's worth through actions. As the jet touched down smoothly on a nearby runway, Jeremiah's family erupted in applause, laughter, and cheers. The children hugged each other and their parents, their faces glowing with excitement. Even the pilot smiled warmly, impressed by Jeremiah's calm confidence and detailed knowledge of the aircraft. Once they had safely landed, Jeremiah walked across the tarmac, feeling the warmth of the morning sun on his face. He looked at the jet, now resting on the runway, its engines silent, but its presence commanding. He knew that this plane was more than a vehicle. It was a symbol of achievement, of vision, and of the ability to rise above prejudice with integrity. Later that afternoon, back at the farm, Jeremiah gathered his family for a quiet conversation. "Today was special," he began, "not just because of the jet, but because it represents what happens when you don't give up, when you stay true to yourself, and when you insist on being treated with respect. Life will always have challenges, but how you face them defines you." His wife placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've taught our children something they will never forget," she said, "and you've reminded all of us that dignity and patience are stronger than doubt and prejudice." Jeremiah nodded, his eyes sweeping over his fields, his family, and the horizon. "Exactly. And now this jet will help us grow, reach more people, and share what we've built here. But the real lesson is what we carry in ourselves. Our hard work, our patience, and our values. Those things can't be bought or sold, and they last far longer than any machine." The following weeks were filled with new experiences. Jeremiah began using the jet for business trips, delivering produce to distant markets faster than ever before. He met with clients, suppliers, and business partners in multiple states within a single day, returning home in time for dinner with his family. Each flight became an example of efficiency, planning, and success achieved through effort rather than shortcuts. But Jeremiah also made time for something more important. He invited young farmers and business owners from his community to visit the jet and learn from his journey. He shared his story openly, explaining the obstacles he faced and the assumptions he had to overcome. The jet became a symbol of possibility, a reminder that success comes from persistence, knowledge, and integrity rather than appearance or luck. One day, while showing a group of young entrepreneurs the jet, Jeremiah reflected on the first salesman who had doubted him. He smiled quietly, not with malice, but with understanding. That doubt had been a turning point. It had reminded him of the importance of preparation, patience, and confidence. It had motivated him to prove that actions and character are far more powerful than assumptions. As the sun set over the farm, the jet gleamed in the fading light, parked near the hangar like a promise of future opportunities. Jeremiah walked toward it slowly, touching the smooth metal and feeling a sense of satisfaction that was deeper than pride. He had faced doubt, shown resilience, and achieved his goal, not only for himself but for his family and community. That night, as the family gathered for dinner, the conversation turned to dreams and plans. The children spoke excitedly about future trips, about exploring new cities, and about possibilities they had never imagined. Jeremiah listened, proud of their enthusiasm and the lessons they were beginning to learn. He realized that the journey had changed more than just his business. It had reinforced values of patience, respect, and integrity within his family. They had seen firsthand how determination and hard work could overcome prejudice, and they had learned the importance of treating others fairly, regardless of appearances. Jeremiah smiled as he looked at his family, the farm, and the horizon beyond. The jet, the flights, and the business growth were all important, but the true victory was the life he had built, one where dignity, perseverance, and respect guided every decision. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Jeremiah felt a quiet sense of peace. He had proven to himself and the world that success is not measured by wealth alone, but by the strength of character, the willingness to work hard, and the courage to rise above doubt. The jet was a tool, yes, but the real achievement lay in the journey itself and in the lives touched along the way. From that day forward, Jeremiah continued to expand his business, mentor others, and share his story. The jet took him to new places, but his roots remained firmly planted in the fields he loved. And every time he looked at it, he remembered the lessons of patience, respect, and perseverance, lessons that would last a lifetime.